Hi, everyone. My name is Amherst Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut League of History Organizations, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to part 2 of our workshop on interpreting slavery at Connecticut museums and historic sites. I'm really pleased to see so many people here, some returns from part 1 and some new folks, faces on the Zoom screen. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I just want to give you a sense of our plan for today. And before I do that, I just want to recognize the work of our board president, Beth Rose, who really was the organizing force behind both parts of this workshop, which was originally scheduled to happen back in March. But then we all know what happened in March. So it's really great to have you all with us here today. We are also very pleased to have with us today Representative Pat Wilson Pheanious, who's going to offer some introductory remarks about the importance of this topic. And then our focus today being on sort of the classroom context and thinking about connecting historic sites with the classroom. We have Dennis Culliton from Witness Stones to talk about working with teachers and students through their project, and also kind of a case study in how Witness Stones has worked in a community with Elizabeth Devine and Tracey Wilson, who have been involved with Witness Stones in West Hartford. Next, we'll have Elizabeth Norman from Connecticut Explored magazine talk about developing materials for the classroom. And she'll be talking about a book that she wrote called Venture Smith's Colonial Connecticut. Well, then, based on some feedback we got last week, we're going to consolidate the breakout session into sort of after all of our presentations have gone. You'll have hopefully about at least 15 minutes to chat with one another about some ideas about how you could bring what you've learned from the presenters back to your own organization, to your own site, and share some resources and ideas that you have. And then we'll reconvene for a large group discussion and a broader Q&A for the panelists and sharing of resources. So that's kind of the rundown for today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Representative Pheanious and hand things over to her.
Okay then. Hi, I'm Pat Wilson Pheanious, and I represent the 53rd District, Ashford, Tolland, and Willington, Connecticut. And I am one of the happy recipients of the benefits of the Witness Stones project. I was sitting on my back porch one day and got a call from Dennis Culliton, who you'll meet soon, who gave me a couple hundred years of my history. And it had an incredible impact on me. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but also about how important the work that you all do, that what you do is to children. And just to make the point that what you highlight in your museums, what you highlight in your classrooms is what makes a real difference to what kids think about and how they think about themselves. And having been many years ago, one of those children who sat through classrooms and talked about some of these issues, I wanted to share some of my thoughts about that. It may be obvious to many how slavery disenfranchised Black people, how it stole value, how it appropriated our talents, how it tried to steal our humanity, how it cruelly separated us from our culture, and how it tried to keep us from being human beings, and how we failed to learn what the impact of that legacy was on us as a people. It may be not so obvious that the failure to teach about these thefts has an impact on our psyche. It makes us pretend that this pain is historical, something that's past and gone, something that doesn't really count because all things are equal now. And we all know that's not true. It also fails when you don't teach real history. You fail to understand what the impact is on people who are not of color, how they are robbed from history, or how that lack of history robs from them as well. I think there's a reluctance to teach hard history because it's painful and everybody understands and appreciates that pain. But I don't think that what people often recognize is the kind of strength, the kind of dogged tenacity, the kind of creative genius, the kind of faith and a belief in self that had to be sustained through slavery in order for people to come out the other end with the value that we have. And I think that gets missed. So when you don't teach about it, you miss all of that. I was raised in a relatively middle-class environment, had the best of education from Connecticut, but I want to talk a little bit about what that education failed to give me and what you all in the work that you're doing and thinking about what you can supply. My education lacked context. Sure, I learned about slavery, but I didn't learn things like the fact that slavery was practiced by Europeans prior to their arrival in America, or just how important slavery was to the North American colonies. Never got taught to me. I never understood the intentionality or the pervasive impact of slavery, or how it was an institution of power specifically designed not just to create maximum profit, but to break the will of people that were enslaved. I don't think I ever heard slavery connected to the notion of white supremacy, or the idea that slavery shaped the fundamental beliefs of Americans about racism, and what an important role white supremacy played in that. Those aren't things that got taught, so we lacked context. My education lost history. There is so many things in history that I never learned. I never knew that more than 10,000 Black Americans fought in the Revolutionary War. Thanks to Dennis, I found out that my sixth great grandfather or fifth great grandfather was one of them, but that was not information that was ever taught to me. I never understood that virtually all of the colonies had slavery, or there were more than 5,000 men that served from all 13 colonies. I also didn't learn things like the inventions of many Black people. I never knew about automatic elevator doors or refrigerator trucks or folding beds or programmable remote controls, or all of the many things that Black people have invented that just sort of got lost in the shuffle. And my American education lacked originality. I experienced the same debilitating exercise when I was a little girl. Basically, that's lets everybody come to school and show something from their family's past about how they came to America. There's some variation of that class or that idea that went on when I was little, and it was humiliating, went on for my son when, and he was humiliated by it, went on for my grandchildren. We're still lacking the originality of using anything except an assignment that intends to tie most people to Europe. Well, if that's not where you hail from, it's kind of a problem. That's where a project like the Witness Stones comes in, because Witness Stone rediscovered lost history. They gave a context for lives that had been long past, and they created new hands-on ways of learning. So the Witness Stones project has a way of fixing some of those things that are historically a problem I think, in American education. What gaining knowledge of my family and my family's history did was it changed me. It made me realize the lives of real people that had gone before me that had been very nebulous in the past. I had assumed that everything happened with the end of slavery, and that is so not true. So much of my history was lost and only regained because of the Witness Stones project. Learning my history validated me as an American. It gave me a sense of belonging and ownership that otherwise I wouldn't have had. And it awakened in me a thirst for knowledge, more knowledge. And it made me angry because I realized how many more children have lost their history and it's never been reconnected. Why is it that their descendants have been cheated from a sense of belonging and entitlement? Why did my white classmates not have the opportunity to understand and acknowledge and appreciate the service and sacrifice of others that didn't look like them? Why were they given such a one-dimensional understanding of history? And it's projects that you'll hear about later, like the Witness Stones project, that change that equation. Why is it, or what is it, I guess I want to say, that children, I believe, need to be validated in the context of their education, they need to be included. They need to see themselves in the curriculum. White children see themselves in the curriculum every day, all the time. It is a constant, from the Vikings to the Roman Empire to Manifest Destiny to the barons of industry in Wall Street. White people are everywhere. People of color only show up when you talk about the Civil War and slavery, or maybe Indians that have been annihilated, and what a shame, you know. But it's not in the context of America. They also need to, you know, children need to know, to understand that although they may be different in look, in hairstyle, and in coloring, that they are equally valued, and that the differences that they bring are important differences that need to be absorbed by everyone. You know, you wonder why you see situations where children, young girls of Asian descent, want to change the way their eyes are shaped, or Black girls with huge, beautiful manes of hair want to have it straightened and curled. It's because of the way our society diminishes difference. And I think that's something our education has to account for. Children need to be validated, and kids of color need to be treated as though their unique differences exist. So the whole nation of teachers, historians, and others who are colorblind, I think, is a mistake. And I think it's a, you know, it's a problem. Because when you are colorblind, you are denying what may be one of my most prominent characteristics, one of the things that is most important to me, one of the things that will define how I'm received and understood by most of the world. So you shouldn't deny it. Children need to be taught as whole human beings. And that means teaching the whole history of all of those human beings. And that's not what we do. We pick a group, often Europeans, and we spend our time talking about that group. We don't include everybody, and everybody who isn't included feels diminished. And I don't know that people, you know, fully appreciate or understand that. I also want to say that these kinds of lessons and these kinds of inclusions are not just important to children of color. They're important to children without color as well, because our world is changing, and we're all going to find that the strength and vitality of America is in its differences, and that those differences need to be recognized. When you simply look at even the census, the figures that are coming out from the census, it suggests that within less than 30 years, the so-called minorities are going to be the majority. And the children in our classrooms, white, Black, brown, and yellow, all need to understand their individual importance so that our world moves forward together and we don't have the same misunderstanding that some people are better, more important, more worthy, more valued, more talked about than the others. And I think that that's something critical. I also think that white children need to know history so that they can appreciate the full picture of human condition and privilege, and better understand why discrimination and exclusion hurts every single one of us. Children without color need to be able to step back, to move away from a debilitating and false sense of superiority based on what they've been taught, because they learned it in school and they may think that it is all there is to know. And indeed, it is not. And as we discover more and more, and we bring more and more to light, I think everyone begins to see that and understand that. So we need to change not just the way we teach, but what we teach and the text from which we teach, to be able to include all of us in a way, you know, that gives us meaning. I think until we do that, we'll inadvertently continue to perpetrate harm on children, harm through exclusion, because when you're excluded, you deem yourself less important. When you don't see yourself, you want to change yourself to look like what is seen. And I think that that is a perspective that teachers and others who are in prominent positions don't fully understand. Hard history is inclusive history. It isn't without pain, but neither is our present. And our future will not be free of racial pain until we confront it, until we balance it, until we put it in perspective, until we eliminate its causes and its disparate outcomes. American history has to be the story of America, and America's history includes all of us. And that history, I'm so proud to be a part of bringing that history for Black Americans forward through projects like the Witness Stone. And I think I've exhausted my time period, and I'm going to move out of the way so that Dennis and others can talk in greater depth about the value of the work that they're doing, because I can tell you it had phenomenal value to me. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Pat, for those incredibly moving remarks. I'd like to introduce Dennis Culliton from Witness Stones, Inc.
Hi, Amaris, and I want to thank you and Beth for putting this project together. And it's always a pleasure to be with Tracy and Liz to talk about the Witness Stones project. It's in Elizabeth Norman, and we don't talk enough, but I'm always pushing your work into the lower middle schools and areas, and certainly Pat Wilson Pheanious. We were just on the phone last night. We speak very often, but we don't get to see each other as much. I think we're mostly on the phone, so very nice. But thank you for inviting me. My name is Dennis Culliton. I'm the executive director and co-founder of the Witness Stones project. We started this project a little over 3 years ago in Guilford, when a friend of mine came back from Germany after first he had heard me speak at the local library about my research on slavery, and then he went to Germany, saw the Stolperstein stones, stumbling stones in the ground for Jews where they lived freely before the Holocaust, and thought that we could bring that idea to Guilford and start thinking about our own complicity, if we can steal from our friends who wrote the book in the term, but complicity with slavery. Us Northerners, I grew up in Massachusetts. I spent most of my life pointing south and saying they were the cause of racism, they were the cause of segregation, they were the cause of the problems we have today in our society. And which meant if they were the cause, then it wasn't our problem to fix. It wasn't something we had to look within our hearts and within our society to see how we fix it. But clearly, the more work we're doing with this project and with others who are looking at the West India trade in the true history of Connecticut's early wealth and continued wealth, we have to tell the true story of slavery. And I think it has an effect on the students and also on the adults as we go through this process. And that's really an exciting part for me. So I'm going to start my little slideshow, and we practiced earlier, but it may or may not work, but we'll see. And here we go. So this is so I'm going to give you a slideshow on the Witness Stones project, and certainly I'm going to go a little quicker than normal, but that's okay because we'll have time to speak later. So our mission statement is: through research, education, and civic engagement, the Witness Stones project seeks to restore the history and honor the humanity of enslaved individuals who helped build our communities. So this is how we started the project. We realized if we start remembering and memorializing the enslaved people here in the North, it's going to be a lot of work. And as important as the work has been and continues to be in Guilford, it's important that we spread this project to other places, because we all have work to do, and we all have, as I'm working on this project, I'm meeting people in Rhode Island and in Massachusetts and Hudson River Valley, New York, and now New Jersey, who are also aiming at the same target. We're trying to tell the same story or a similar story about slavery in the North and how we benefited from slavery, to help us really, I'll just say, add the, color back into the fabric of our history. This is what made us tick. We have wonderful people that we can memorialize and remember who are white, and we have done a pretty good job of that over the centuries. And now we're looking at the enslaved people, free Blacks, and others. And again, my friends, at the Connecticut Freedom Trail, they've been doing wonderful work for years, and we're just doing a part of that that's specifically looking at enslaved people in particular communities or specific communities. So what do we do in the Witness Stones project? We provide teacher and staff training to present the history of slavery local and regionally. Even for teachers, we have to retrain them to understand how Connecticut was part of a slave economy. We were part of a slave economy. We were trading with the West Indies. We were trading with the American South. We were filling our vessels from day one to send south. That's a different presentation, but we have to share that with the teachers because they're not all learning that in college. And I would say any teacher, probably over 25 years old, would struggle with this new information, but we help them through it. Then we help them understand what slavery was like. And we share these, we'll go over them soon, but 5 themes. What lenses can we look at slavery through? We research and find primary and secondary documents that support the story of slavery. So we can not say, this is what my teacher said. I looked at the manumission paper. I looked at the will where Tom was sent, was given from Joseph Phelps to his wife in the will, including Tom's bed. And the kids can see the evidence and the proof of slavery in their community. We share a curriculum that has been holding up, and we're very excited about that from community to community. We find ways to explore, to engage the community, and we assist in the installation ceremony. It's very important, not that the schools do this as a standalone activity, but they include the churches and the historical societies and the house museums and the local African American groups. Maybe there's a AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church in your community. Maybe you have an NAACP. We're going to engage the entire community in this process. And we can see on the left is this is David Bush. We could see a listing of his enslaved people that were in the vital records. We find a lot of great information in the vital records and church records, probate records, and other places like that. So how are we looking at slavery? We developed these 5 themes for this project, but they're not dissimilar to the themes you might have if you were looking at the Holocaust, or if you're looking at the Irish potato famine, if you're looking at what happened in Rwanda or other countries, Cambodia and other countries where atrocities happened. And we have to start thinking about slavery as an atrocity, is that we had slave labor camps. They were labor camps where people were held in captivity. They were prisoner camps. If we're starting to change our vocabulary. But what do the students do? They look at dehumanization, the enslaved as property, the treatment of the enslaved, paternalism, economics of slavery and freedom, and human agency and resistance. And if they look at these themes and they take them and they use them as a lens to look at these documents, they can begin to understand and extract information that helps them understand both Connecticut colonial slavery, but slavery of the enslavement of an individual. If we say there were 2,300 people enslaved in Connecticut, well, that's a big number. If we say Caesar was enslaved 2 houses down the street, or was enslaved at that house museum, or was enslaved where the town hall is today, that has a much bigger effect in some cases because it personalizes. It's like my neighbor was enslaved. The person down the street from me was enslaved. Their children were held in captivity or sold away. Those stories are what help the students really begin to feel, not only understand, but to feel what slavery might have been like. And what we do is we have the kids share what we call a jigsaw activity, where they're learning, they're becoming experts, groups of kids are becoming experts on one of these themes, and they share them with each other so the group gets to see the big picture. And this is a way that we've been teaching, for decades, and I'm sure they've been teaching that way forever, but the kids get to teach each other, and then they take those skills that they learn by looking at the 5 themes and apply them to a single person. This is just some details of the life. You as a person, I'm sure Liz and Tracy are doing this in West Hartford. You have to put together family trees. You collect documents. You just start putting the documents together, because the kids really don't have time to find the documents. Maybe if you're doing it as an independent study in high school, but what we have to do is collect the documents with the help and gifts from the historical societies, and then make them accessible to the students. And we can see on the left a stone for Moses, and Moses was considered locally the king of the slaves. He was a factotum. We know he sent Reverend Fowler's son to Yale. He paid for his tuition. We know he rang the church bell. We know all these things about Moses. But this stone for Moses It's installed in front of the town hall in Guilford because that's the site where Reverend Fowler lived. So when you're going into the town hall in Guilford, you kind of, the term in German is Stolperstein, which means stumbling stone. You kind of stumble over the stone for Moses and realize that a very important person lived here before the first selectman started working here. So that's part of the kind of how people are understand, how people get to experience this. And then they go back and ask at the library, well, who's Moses? And then they find our website and we have a brief narrative that the kids wrote about Moses that they can learn more about him. There's some other information about Moses. We have about 36 data points for Moses. And, in my next retirement, maybe I'll write a book about him. But right now, we have all this information. I'm just sharing 8 with you. But you could see Moses shows up directly or indirectly, in a sense, starting in 1728, when Montrose and Phyllis were purchased in Boston and brought to Guilford. Moses happens to be Pat Wilson Pheanius's, if I calculate it right, 5th great uncle. So he is an uncle in her family tree, and Montrose and Phyllis are her 6th generation great grandparents. We've traced her family back, or from her grandkids back, we're at 11 generations. And I don't think there's too many places in the world that have 11 generations of African Americans in the United States. There's probably a few, but this story helps us. It helped us learn. It's almost the story of Adam and Eve for us. It helped us learn what slavery was like, what freedom was like, what happened after the Civil War in the North. Pat's family went to Virginia, and her father and her father is the 1st generation back from Virginia to Connecticut. So wonderful stories, and again, there's books to be written, but it's not not yet. We're just, because there's people to be taught first. So we'll teach people first, and then maybe we'll write a book. But what do we have? We have everything from an indenture that Moses was rented out while he was still enslaved to Mr. Fowler, to Reverend Fowler, and then afterwards he was held. He was kept by Mr. Fowler after Reverend Fowler, after Mrs. Naughty died. I would always ask the kids, why do they have to put the word meat, that Mr. Fowler or Reverend Fowler has to provide meat? And some of the kids get it, like, if you don't list meat, he doesn't get meat. So how is he treated? Well, he's treated in a way that you have to insist that he gets fed some meat, otherwise he'll probably just be eating gruel. This is again, Moses is part of this family tree. Pat's father was a Tuskegee airman, fought in 3 wars, retired as a lieutenant colonel. His story all by itself is amazing. And then his father's story at Goucher College is amazing, and the educators in her family, and Pat herself, and her son, But anyway, it's a wonderful story because the kids can see that through this family of enslaved people, that they, through their hard work and agency and sometimes resistance, they were able to achieve at a very high level generationally. And it's something that we're able to share with our students as well as the community, because we have Moses' stone, we have her aunt Candace's stone, we have the stones of Montrose and Phyllis right in front of the savings bank on the green in Guilford. So we have these wonderful stories that are coming out from us sharing this work with our students. This is some of the places, I say present, future, and potential partnerships. We are working throughout Connecticut, and we're beginning to start to talk to people and work with people in other states. But we've worked with Greenwich Historical Society. I'll be presenting to the genealogists, Madison Congregational Church and Historical Society. We're starting to work with Salisbury School and pulling in the Historical Society there. Greenwich Academy, Sacred Heart Greenwich, and Greenwich Historical Society are all clients. We're starting to work in Old Lyme. We have a contract accepted with a museum in New Jersey and schools in Hopewell Valley. So we can see, it looks like I copied one of them, but you could see that there's various opportunities. And right now I spent the morning looking at the Phelps family in Simsbury because a teacher at the middle school there is interested in doing a project. In Suffield, I'm presently doing a project with the Historical Society. We worked with the New Haven Museum and the Party Morris House to bring the project there. And the project is growing, but it's growing through a partnership. The best way that we could bring the project to a community is through a historical society and possibly through a house museum to engage the students with the materials that have already been collected, that need to be collected, and also to bring people through the historical societies to do the research, or in this case, the Bush Holly House, they have a slave quarters. They have a place designated where they believe that the 15 enslaved people held in captivity by David Bush lived. So it's a second floor of this wing of the house. And so they're beginning to reinterpret their tours and their visits based on the research that they had already done. They had done some fantastic research, and now working with the students to help reinterpret some of the materials and find new materials to share with other visitors to the place. And then I think I just have
Dennis, I hate to cut in here, but we're getting a little behind schedule. I'm hopeful that maybe we can hand things over to your partners in West Hartford pretty soon.
Yeah, and this is it. This is the last slide. So sorry about that. So we can see, what are we doing? Learning outcomes. We're, we're asking the audience and the students to become consumers and products of, with information literacy, collaborate, communicate, present their findings, and build a foundation to discuss hard history on the path towards truth and reconciliation. So this is the last stone that's been installed was this summer in front of the Madison Congregational Church right on the green, and working with the kids at the country school. So again, we could see talking to the people at the Graves House and Madison Historical Society, and the historian at the church helped us put together a story of Latouche that the students were able to tell us through their use of the materials. So thank you very much, and we'll talk soon. Let me unshare.
Thank you, Dennis.
Sure.
Tracey Wilson and Liz Devine from West Hartford. Tell us how it worked in your community.
Let me just say, the first thing I should say is about Dennis. Tracy and I were listening to, I think it must have been 2017 in November. We're listening to a public history program, and at the same exact time, we heard Dennis presenting, and we called each other, and we said, "Oh, we got to meet this guy." And so he's been a real inspiration to us. So I just want to say that it's a bit, his dedication to the actual history, to the integrity of the history has really been important for us. So,
as Dennis said, thanks so much for having us and for organizing this. I will say, for Liz and I, over the last 2.5 years, we've been working on this, and certainly since the pandemic, I think we get together every day, and we say this is really, we're really feeling as retired teachers that we're living meaningful lives because of what we think we can leave for the community. So as Dennis was saying, and as Liz would say, is this project, you really have to build capacity, and you have to find partners. And we have several partnerships we'll talk about, but one of the other things that we like to do is to think about how is this related to the present day. And I think Pat put this so well, that this pain and the cruelty has not gone away. And so we, as the protests went on, we're in an unusual moment here with so much talk about issues around racism, that we realized in a lot of ways what we were doing with witness stones is saying their names. Just as today we're saying George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we're trying to say the names of people who lived in the 18th century in our town. And sometimes we like to say, we're the 1693 Project. That's our first mention of someone who was enslaved here in what was then the West Division of Hartford. But that kids in our town should know that date. They often say 1679, that's when the lands were divided among the Anglo settlers here, and the first mill is built, but the person who built the first mill was enslaved 2 people. And we know that from the will in 1693. And one of the things that's happened this year, we've been working with the West Hartford Public Schools for 2.5 years. They rewrote their curriculum this summer, and lo and behold, we're written into the curriculum for the 8th grade. So every student has an assured learning experience of being part of the Witness Stones project. And this is no small thing. There are over 750 8th graders in town. And so now, again, with the pandemic, we have to sort of figure out how do we make this happen? Because, as you know, nobody is being able to go in and visit schools. And so this is a really big deal for us, being part of the West Hartford Public Schools and also getting support for the Foundation for West Hartford Schools.
I think the other thing also is the is KO now, the Kingswood Oxford
Yeah.
has every 11th grader is doing Witness Stones. So we're also working with them. And then we have a class at Solomon Schechter as well.
So one of the really important parts of this project, the research, obviously, and you know, we have another partner, Denise, who helps us with our website and with sort of keeping us in shape. But it is more than just doing the research and putting stones in the ground. That there's an educational piece for students, and then there's a civic engagement piece. And so for us, the civic engagement piece is putting these witness stones in the ground, and we are doing that in the Old Center Cemetery, and hope in the future to be putting them, as Dennis is doing in Guilford, in front of the homes in which they were forced to live. But we're asking participants to do that as well. So 2 years ago, we worked with 5th graders at Renbrook, and we realized the person they were studying, a man named Prout, died at Fort Ticonderoga in 1776. And so the students learned about Prout, about his enslaver, and then they wrote to the town council and asked them if Prout's name could be put on the Veterans Memorial. And in fact, it was. I don't know if you can see it here. And we went and watched them engrave it. And then this is the first time the students on their field trip actually went and saw it. And the engagement was just incredible. They couldn't believe it happened.
Exactly. And I think the two things that are important here is A, they're 5th graders, because we're also combating a lot of people's idea that 5th graders can't really handle this, which of course they did. And the second thing is that they were great in front of the town council. So not only did the kids come, but so did their parents. And that's great. So we really are building capacity there.
Yeah. And 2 of these students actually spoke at the Memorial Day commemoration.
All right.
This spring, when our work with the schools was canceled because of the pandemic, we actually pivoted and had a community orientation, 2 community programs that we did virtually. And this is a poem written by one of the adults who was part of our project. And Liz and I are both historians, so you know, we're originally set up to, you know, everyone who does this writes a history paper. And then we realized the power of the arts. And we just have 2 other examples of things that students had done. This
You have
one,
about 10 minutes, Tracy, just because of the timing thing. Just so you know.
and
Okay.
this is one by a woman named Simone, who was promised her freedom and never given it.
This was a 6th grader who did this.
Yes.
From Solomon Schechter.
And then this one by a student at King Philip Middle School who really uses these topics which Dennis was talking about: dehumanization, humanization, the prophet, and she embeds them in the slavery in this cuff here, and then the chains, which she sees 2 ways as chaining people, but also the bonds that would have developed between those that were enslaved. And then this Juneteenth, This new group in town called the Concerned Parents of Color of West Hartford used our research to celebrate Juneteenth on the center green for the first time. And it was a really moving ceremony. And, we really have buy-in. This woman works for the school system. This is our mayor. This is a student from Conard, one of the high schools. And this woman, Adrienne Billings, has really been the push here, and realized that this green, from our research, that this green is named after an enslaver. And the First Church owns the green. And this group has really pushed to get the name of the green changed, and then to repurpose this green as Unity Green. So that's sort of in the process now. With the pandemic, we really made a pivot to sort of more virtual learning. And we really got a lot of these ideas from Phillipsburg Manor, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And we spoke with the education person there. And if you haven't seen the videos they have on their website, they're really tremendous. And what we've done is put together a virtual project, really. And I'm just going to quickly take you there. And how much time do I have?
Now you got about 6 minutes, my dear.
Oh, really?
Yep, we're going. We're good.
We're good.
I'll give them a cop. I'll put the website on the chat. That's what I think that would help.
So we put together a virtual learning program, and the first program is about witnessing slavery and freedom here in the West Division. And what we've done is we have made videos for the students to watch. And so on this page, we have 14 different videos that are less than 5 minutes that really give the context. So unlike Dennis, who has 35 points for Moses, we're working with people who have maybe 3 data points. And so when you have only 3 data points, you really need to develop the context of the times. And so our ultimate goal is to get students to tell the stories. And so here we have examples where Liz and I have told the stories of 4 people. We have videos about the church. And then we have videos about the laws. And some of this, we were led a bit by Elizabeth's book on Venture Smith. She has such a nice context there. And then we have a whole section, a section that's on freedom seekers and trafficking advertisements.
Just to point out the one on trade, and one of the things we're trying to do with teachers is to give them an opportunity to give us feedback. And we have to do a lot of professional development. We just finished 3 professional development sessions, and they wanted us to do more with the context of the West Division, and then tie it to the enslaved people, which is what we did here. And so the trade in the colonial division, I did that one, Tracey did the other one on daily life. And so they can use this as a way to give context for their students before we come into the classroom.
So this is just an example of a slide they might see. This is from Captain Nathaniel Hooker's inventory. He was the father of the 2nd minister in the West Division who was an enslaver. And we found, well, Liz, you're better at telling the story, or should I just click so they can see?
No, why don't we keep going? It says at 147. I just say quickly, Denise found this connection. I found the document, but we went onto the slavery database and found out that this Leviathan actually made trips between all the Caribbean islands and then up to Hartford. So here's the father of Nathaniel Hooker, who's the minister of the church, engaging in the trafficking of human beings.
And so the kids can see this, and then they can click on Liz telling the story, and she does in about 2 minutes. She's incredible. Yeah. And then we have a whole thing on daily life here as well. And one of the things that I've found so interesting is using documents that have been used in the past, but now we're using them for different reasons. So this one is about Jerusha Whiting, and this tells what she wore. Telling about her clothing. And then this, we just sort of realized this is the freedom seeker Jude, who runs away. And we realized that, look, here are clothing that people in colonial times wore. And then, so I talk about that in this little video, and then I compare it to the man who enslaved him. So here's John Whiting, and here is his inventory, and here's what he had, and the types of cloth it was made out of. And so it gives kids a sense of this difference in wealth. And it also gives us an idea that some of these documents that you may have been using for a long time, there may be another way to go about that. And I just have a couple other ones I wanted to show that were here.
You had about a minute there, Trace.
Okay, got it.
A quick question.
We're just moving through this.
Yeah, we just had a quick question from Lorraine about the slide mentioning artist Titus Kaffar. How did you incorporate his work of reinterpreting the enslaved experience?
He has this great video that's called Shifting Your Gaze, and it's a TED Talk. It's about 12 minutes long, and it's so powerful. We've used it from fifth graders through 12th graders, and each one of them brings something out of it. But he just talks about how in these paintings, you see all these white people, and there's one black person, and he actually takes his paintbrush and whitewashes out all the white people. So you shift your gaze to this, to a black person who's in the painting, so that we need to think differently. Just as like in our town, Goodman Green, now when we go by it, we think differently about it. Our gaze has been shifted because we know this man was an enslaver. And then just our last document here, this is Jerusha Whiting's inventory. And, you know, we're connected to the Noah Webster house, and Webster was not an enslaver. This signature here you see is his father, Noah Webster Sr., not an enslaver, but he was an appraiser. And so on Jerusha Whiting's inventory, we have his signature, and then you realize that in 1777, Noah Webster Sr. is going into people's houses and appraising human beings as property. And so he is complicit in this system of slavery. The institution, this is institutionalized racism. And so it's a chance to talk to students about that even if you're not an enslaver, in fact, your hand is in it, at least not yours, but Noah Webster's hand, Noah Webster Sr.'s hand is in it as well.
Nice.
And so I think I think Pat talked about this, the power of the institution, which really undergirded the growth of our town as we look at how the economy grew and how wealth was passed from one generation to the next.
The only other thing I want to add is Tracy could just show this and then we'll end because I know we have to end. There's the piece about program 2. So what we've done is taken all this, and then for each of the schools, we have developed special packets for each of them. And for each of them, there is packets for, the people that they're studying, as well as worksheets. And so we're taking these stories and we're bringing it right to the schools and giving them a chance to work with the materials. Dennis is absolutely right. They don't have a chance. They don't have time to do their own research, but we can curate the research and then we can talk about it with them. And then from that, in each of the buildings, the students are going to think about how they would tell a story after they've used the inquiry method to ask questions, develop the story, and then it allows them to really tell the story, which humanizes these individuals using the documents in town. So there we go.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. What a great story of how this has worked in one community. It seems like a project that is really ongoing and has been incorporated into the way you do things there, which is wonderful to see. I want to hand things over now to Elizabeth Norman at Connecticut Explored magazine, who's going to talk about her book on Venture Smith.
And can you hear me?
Yes.
And should I try to condense my remarks?
If you can, I'll shoot for 15 instead of 20. That would be helpful.
Okay,
So we can have some time for conversation.
Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
And sorry, I want to get to my slideshow. Okay, so let's see here. All right, Venture Smith's Colonial Connecticut. So I'm Elizabeth Norman, with publisher of Connecticut Explored, magazine of Connecticut history, and also a contributor to Grading the Nutmeg, the podcast of Connecticut history, co-editor of African American Connecticut Explored, which we co-produced with the Amistad Center for Art and Culture, and published by Wesleyan University Press, which I was happy to see Melissa Houston had on her book pile of necessary resources. That book is 50 essays by 30 scholars on the long arc of the African American experience in Connecticut. And let me see here. So this is who I am. You'll see there, African American Connecticut Explored. And then we've gotten involved in doing some educational resources. The first one, Where I Live, Connecticut, for grades 3 and 4, social study. It's built around the social studies frameworks for the state of Connecticut. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit. And then on Connecticut Explored, we've organized a lot of our content onto topics pages this summer. So we have a page for African American history and one for Native American history that you can find. So these are stories that have crossed all of our 75 or more issues of the magazine. And these are particularly good for you resources for teachers, for staff, for your interns, for use with high school students and above. And then on Where I Live, back to 3rd and 4th grade, we have several stories that are, this is material written at the 3rd grade reading level. So we have the Amistad story, and Tracy and Liz helped me with that. A related story, obviously, about Joseph Sinkay, one about Venture Smith. And then we have other stories about African Americans in the 19th and 20th century. So again, following the African American Connecticut Explored, we're really interested, and I'm going to talk more about this, but we call the long arc of the African American experience. So beginning at the beginning of the colony and coming right up through to today. We're also, and you're going to see, I'm going to be touching on Native Americans a little bit too, because I like that story to be brought into this. If we're talking about all of our Connecticut history, we want to talk about all of our peoples, and I'm really focusing, of course, around the colonial period. And then for 8th grade, we've collected a couple of, for the themes for the 8th grade curriculum. The one relating to the topic today is we've pulled together a lot of resources and stories around the question, did slavery just happen in the South? Well, obviously, we all know that it didn't, but you're introducing 8th graders to American history, and they're mostly studying the 19th century. This will help bring it back to Connecticut and back into the 17th century, 17th and 18th century. And it really focuses, it uses James Mars's narrative, which is a nice entry into that topic. And again, another way to use a first person voice to tell, so James Mars can tell students and your visitors what his life experience was about. And all of these resources are collected on our Teach page. So Venture Smith's Colonial Connecticut, when we were working on Where I Live, a curriculum specialist that we worked with on that from Simsbury, Melanie Mee, and I asked her what she wanted for 5th grade, and she said she wanted a book about colonial Connecticut. And I was like, well, you know, there's a bunch of that already out there, what's not out there. And I thought about Venture Smith's narrative published in 1798, because he tells us so much about colonial Connecticut. So I always say this is a book about colonial Connecticut. And from the earlier presentations we've had, which focused very much around slavery in Connecticut, I'm pulling us back a little bit more to a little bit broader perspective. So I don't mean in any ways to say that's the right way or better way. I'm just, if we pull back a little bit, just up a little bit, maybe not 10,000 feet, but look at Connecticut and its founding and its history in a little bit bigger umbrella. This is a book about colonial Connecticut, but importantly, it foregrounds the African-American voice, which has not been really heard before for kids. And other than obviously in the work that our presenters have been doing. But importantly, I'm really trying to present it here in from a three-way perspective, so that as kids can start to learn about the founding of Connecticut, that there was already some small level of diversity. It wasn't just the white British settlers. Native Americans obviously were here first and remained here and remained an important presence. Africans were brought here against their will, but were also very important in building the colony. And importantly, not all of them were enslaved, some were free, including Dr. Catherine Hermes at Central has, in the research on her project for the ancient burying ground, she has found more information about Philip and Ruth Moore from Hartford, who were free landholding Black family in Hartford in the late 1600s. So again, from the beginning, this is not a story of slavery. This is a story of freedom and slavery. And I wanted to just touch back to what Dr. Broyle started us off last week. And he said about himself, he said he was a scholar of American slavery, which is to say he's a scholar of resistance. And I thought that was very beautifully put. So I'm going to go really sort of try to go quickly through this, but this is a book, I don't know if you could see me, 108-page book, but it's available in print and online. We specially commissioned illustrations because obviously there are no pictures of Venture Smith and his family. So Connecticut artist Michael Borders did illustrations for us. We have historical illustrations, maps, charts, glossary, bibliography. A full curriculum is available with this, created by a curriculum consultant who had been a curriculum person for the public schools in Connecticut, Carol Luckenbach. She created it. It's all based on the inquiry model. And I've built out a primary source library online, and I want to spend some time looking at that, because I'm hoping that as all you organizations are finding documents and uncovering this information, that there might be some material that you'd like to add to this primary source library. So just quickly how this fits with the standards. If you're not familiar, the social studies frameworks are available online. We actually have links to it on Where I Live has a link to it. It's easy to find. But for fifth grades, they're asking these questions, asking for the curriculum to address, how do Americans define freedom and equality? Is America a land of political, economic, and social opportunity? How does Connecticut contribute to that story? Is the United States a just society? And how has the concept of justice evolved over time? All the work that we are all doing here and talking about is so directly related to this. And to echo what Representative Pheanious says at the beginning, kids need to see themselves in this history, but they need to see themselves in a positive way, in a way that is a trajectory of freedom and progress and success. And I think fortunately you can find some great examples of that. You obviously can find a lot of the opposite, but it's really a nuanced story. And I think we're used to kind of celebrating and lauding our history. And this is a different way of looking at it, where you're really looking at it more honestly and in more of a measured way. I'd love to give you a free copy of Venture Smith's Colonial Connecticut. If you'd like a copy, just email me and I'll send it out to you, because there's some good information in here that I think will be helpful in your work, just again, as context for the research that you might be doing in your own institution or in your own town. So just Venture Smith has 4 parts. The first 2 parts are his narrative. So I always say that he gets first billing. The book is by Venture Smith, and because he wrote the first 2 sections of the book. And then the second two parts kind of backfill because he was here in the second half of the colonial period. And some people will say, well, you should have put the first part first, but we really, again, it's important to foreground Venture Smith's words in this book. So he starts it off, and then we go back and talk about the first 100 years, and then there's a chapter that goes more specifically into slavery in colonial Connecticut. And so you got a picture of one of his pages on the right-hand side. I did paraphrase, revise his narrative to grade level, but because of the emphasis in Common Core and the state curriculum around primary sources, I wanted kids to be able to know when they're reading his exact words and when they're reading my paraphrased words. So his words are in bold and mine are in regular type. And I was very careful not to add anything. I didn't add any dialogue. What was he thinking? What was he feeling? I'm a historian, not a novelist. So if he didn't say it, it's not in here. And so again, if a student wanted to see, well, what did he exactly say? They can go back and find the original narrative. And there's a link to that, and I'll show you where. And then I've included a lot of stuff in here that really is, again, about colonial Connecticut. What was in Venture's wallet? How did banking work? How did, what were the ways things were bought and sold? These are things we sort of don't remember if we're not colonial scholars. There is no common currency. The British, it was the British pound, but the British kept especially pound notes out of circulation. So there were all kinds of, he has Spanish dollars, he has Portuguese coins, and so there's really just a lot of richness about how the colonial economy worked, and he's very much involved in it. I tried to bring in other people's stories and voices too, so that kids wouldn't think there was just one Venture Smith, that there was, you see in the plaque here, Latham, Lambert, and Jordan Freedom at the Battle of Groton. Cuffy Wells, this happens to be a Revolutionary War era set of pages, but Cuffy Wells was a doctor in the, worked as a doctor in the Revolutionary War. And the story of Caesar and Lois Peters, who were enslaved to a loyalist, and it's just a fantastic story. And on the primary source website, there is a document about how we know Caesar and Lois Peters' story. And then you'll find, some good graphs and charts, including I did the very, very hard work of figuring out every New England state plus New York, and when did its slavery end? And it was not simple, and it's a little bit murky, but this is the best I could do to tell you how that worked. And that in itself is very interesting. We did pilot Venture Smith's Colonial Connecticut in East Haddam with the 7th grade and in Middletown with the 5th grade. And honestly, the feedback that we got was that kids just really appreciated hearing the true, honest story from a real person from Connecticut. And they found Venture Smith's story as compelling as I did, and that was really very rewarding. So I'm gonna end my screen sharing here. And I wanna go to the website and just show you this primary source library and just look at a couple things. And so that you can see what, oh, let me see here. If I can stop and share. Sorry, I'm going to narrate. Trying to do this. Okay, now, oops. I don't know, am I screen, okay, sorry. Here we go. A little novice at this screen sharing thing. Is everyone seeing Venture Smith's Colonial Connecticut?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Amherst. All right, so this is the website, and I'm actually logged, so now I'm logged out. So this is the screen that you'll see, and Venture Smith's, the Where I Live website is entirely free online. Venture Smith is behind a paywall, and it's kind of a classroom license, or you can buy the print books. But on the website for both teachers and for kids, you will see this primary source library, which is free and open and accessible to anyone. And I've been working a lot on building this out during this COVID period, and I've added a lot of documents here under a bunch of different headings. That the idea was that because social studies curriculum wants kids to work with primary sources, and as Tracy and Dennis and Liz have said, it's hard to get kids to go out and find them. Could we just create a library of them that they could take a look at, find one that was of interest of them, and then do some kind of project around it? So there's all kinds of things where I was just trying to use documents that might explore things about how the colony worked from the British perspective. Obviously about Venture Smith. So here you'll find a link to the full narrative. Here you'll find a link to the archaeological dig that Lucianne Lavin did, which is also a fantastic resource. A land sale document, and I was down in the Haddam town records, and you can actually, like, there it is. There's and a lot of these, because this is for kids, I've tried to scaffold them, so, or at the very least to transcribe them, and then some of them have interpretations or descriptions of them that could help kids to understand what it is, because a lot of this stuff is, as you know, it's impenetrable. So I was like looking at the colonial records from 1663, just picked a random date, and I came across this little sentence here: "The court doth authorize the court of Southold to issue the decision respecting Pepper, now in durance there, and to send him to Barbados or banish him according as the nature of the offense requires." And I just thought, wow, what does that mean? I feel like this is a history mystery. We have a man named Pepper. He's only named by his first name. He's being held in jail in Southold. There's a geography lesson. In 1663, Southold is part of Connecticut. They might send him to Barbados or banish him. And this to me looks like a very early clue about slavery in colonial Connecticut. So lots of interesting things to find in the colonial records. I wanted to just talk a little bit about, I was reading, thanks to Regina Mason's book about the life of William Grimes, I became acquainted with the narrative of Borrero Brinch, or James Brace, as he later calls himself, of Milford, Connecticut. This should be called Connecticut's sixth slave narrative, or as we would want to call it today, sixth freedom narrative, because he spent about 20 years enslaved in Connecticut, and his writing about it is just beautiful and, terrorizing. I'm sorry, I'm not coming up with the right word, but I mean, it's terrifying. But he works on a privateer in the French and Indian War, and then he's enslaved in Milford, and then he fights in the Revolutionary War to get his freedom, and he writes all about it. And so with the book that I've noted here, Carrie Winter, The Blind African, here's information about who was enslaved, he is enslaved to, but you can read his telling about his experience. And, it's interesting, the last person he was enslaved to was, I think her name is Mary Stiles, and he calls her, she educates him, like literally herself, teaches him to read, and he has a great affection for her, and yet she's another one of these characters or figures in history where, she did not, why did she not free him? She dies before he dies before she, I can't remember exactly, he fights in the the Revolutionary War, and then he comes home and her son does free him, and he eventually moves to Vermont. So I'm kind of going on and on, but I invite you to take a look at this. And if you have things that you would like to contribute to it, this is the first place I've actually found, for example, here you actually have the language around the law that ended slavery in Connecticut. I've heard it referred to, I'd never seen the language of it. It's right here. And then just in closing, I'm reading Ronald Takaki's A Different Mirror, which I highly recommend. And he talks about the Dawes Act of 1887 that allowed for the government to allocate Native American reservation lands to individuals in 160-acre tracts to try to turn the Plains Indians into farmers to improve the land and such and such. Well, the exact same thing happened here in Connecticut, and you can read about it in the Mohegan petition, which is on the primary source library there, to the Connecticut General Assembly in 1798, which is to say that there's a lot of parallels and things that kids can learn about American history through Connecticut history and Connecticut's colonial history. And really, that it's around this idea of property and land, and that land, according to the British, like individually owned plots of land were the basis for an orderly society, and not just owning it, but improving it. And if ever there was a euphemism for that. So as you're looking through records and you're looking through, probate records and land deeds and wills and such, account books, reflect that those are reflecting on a system and a structure that the British colonizers created around land and ownership, and that those were also barriers and ways that it could be manipulated to be a gatekeeping system, how debt was often used to separate people from their land, especially African Americans and Native Americans. And then you kind of get right up to the 20th century, to Ta-Nehisi Coates and others' arguments for reparations and such. So I'm going to end there. But last, I just wanted to put out a request for, as you're all digging around in your records, to look for voting records for free Black people, especially in the early Republic period, because Ramin Ganeshram, who spoke at the first session, and I are very interested in this topic, and we did an op-ed piece in the Hartford Current, and we would like to find more, we know of just a couple of records, but we'd like to know more about that early Republic voting. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. Black suffrage is an undertold story. We could use help out in the towns to really uncover more of that story. All right.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. What I want to do quickly, we had hoped to be back to a big conversation now, but I do want to take a few minutes to give us an opportunity to just chat in small groups about some of the things you've been thinking about. And if I can offer a guiding question here for you as I shuttle you into some breakout rooms. The question I'd like you to think about together, bring your video up if you haven't done so already, introduce yourselves quickly to one another. I think a little bit about how you might connect stories that you might be able to tell at your museum or historic site with the classroom, either through some of the examples that have been talked about here or through other ideas that you have either from this session or the last. So I'm going to separate everyone into a bunch of breakout rooms, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes for a quick wrap up. We'll start the recording again. So I hope you had some good conversations in your small groups. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to do more of that, but I did want to take a moment to thank all of our presenters for being here and for everything that you shared about the projects that you've been working on and your experiences. It's really an inspiration to see this kind of work going on across the state of Connecticut. And we at the League are really honored to be able to share with others around the state your efforts and help get the word out about it and make some connections, hopefully so that this is the sort of work that we can continue to do across Connecticut. I want to open the floor up for some general Q&A. If you've got a question, you can pop it in the chat. And I can call on you. You can ask your question in person, or you can just throw it in the chat and I'll lob it to our presenters. Go for it.
So, one of the things that we spoke about was, and I needed help with, and maybe more people can give me help on this, is we're finding that teaching what we're teaching now, or 21st century, was different than what we were teaching 2 years ago. The theme, the attitude, are we a bunch of white people talking about slavery, to be honest, in Farmington, because we're 85% white. Where are the other groups that we're bringing up? The Native Americans, we just did a seminar, a webinar for the high school who's trying to get rid of or thinking of getting rid of their Indian mascot. And we had to speak on that. And I was saying to the ladies that these are adults, these are Board of Education people. When I explained how we kind of, we're the victors are the ones that record the history, and we kind of pushed them out. And one person basically said, well, how come we didn't know this before? We pushed them out. It wasn't like I wanted to say, what did you think? What did you think? What did you think history is all about? But I think it's very delicate and on how we teach these things right now. We have these wonderful tools that are just so factual, but maybe someone can help me with what they've experienced and how they've approached things. So I would appreciate that.
Yeah, if I could say something, Portia, and it's nice to see you.
Yeah, same here, Dennis.
It's, it really, I know in Guilford, they're trying, we just changed our mascot in Guilford, and there was a big pushback. I'll just tell you that's going to happen. And now that the school is trying to teach a more, what they call an anti-racist curriculum, there's pushback again from the community, feeling it's an anti-white curriculum. So there is, in other words, there are people you're going to bang in Guilford's as, liberal as I think any community in Connecticut, very similar demographics maybe to Farmington. But I think really what you were hearing today from Elizabeth and Liz and Tracy and myself is if you can get to the primary documents, if you can get to the things that people, it is not about us rewriting histories. We're taking the real history and looking at it to a different lens. One of the schools I work with talks about decolonizing the curriculum. Maybe that's not the word you want to use in Farmington, but they're also saying, let's take that, let's have the history not of and by white people. How can you tell the history of Connecticut that's more colorful, that includes the story of the indigenous people and includes the story. If 3 or 4 or 5% of the population of Farmington was African American during the time of slavery, why isn't it today? Those are like these big questions that we're able to begin to answer by looking at the past without being crazy judgmental, but saying, these are the facts and let's move forward with this new set of facts. The hard thing is the teachers haven't been taught this. And I would say maybe teachers who are, under 25 or under 30 haven't been taught this. So they were taught the same way you and I were. And we won't go say how far back that was.
Well, and I think also with historical societies, we've kind of taught that way too. We're kind of raising our consciousness, it seems, in this 21st century, and we're trying to be a little more fair. I wanted to ask Pat, Pat, I'm finding even with, we're on the Underground Railroad with the Grand Central Station, the homicide captive stayed here in Farmington. We have a big history. But I'm finding that a lot of African Americans in town don't want to be associated with slavery, don't want to get involved with this. It's like, I am who I am. Don't associate me with slavery. And so I get that, you know, and I get all that. And it's so you're kind of like, okay, so now
Who am I doing this
we
for?
do, yeah, how do we, you know,
Well,
navigate?
you know, I can certainly understand, and I do understand why no one wants to be associated with slavery. One of the problems for children are that they don't want to be associated with either.
Yeah.
And the whole lesson is a abstract humiliation. And what most teachers don't understand is that aspect of it. When you teach about slavery and you have the little black child in the all-white classroom, or maybe not even the all-white classroom, but just in the classroom, that is a living example of a slave.
Yeah.
And the way what we have in our history books and what we know about slaves, which is so little, it is all negative. It is all demeaning. It is all, you know, none of it celebrates their humanity. Most of it, either they were the problem that caused the Civil War, they are the pickaninnies in the corner by the house that you see and you don't, you know, there's nothing positive about it. And until we adjust, until we until we start teaching, like I said, all culture, it's not just Blacks,
Right.
it's Asians, it's Native Americans, it's all of the people that made this country and have been, you know, pushed out. So I think until we recalibrate and begin teaching not what has been called his story, because as you point out, history is the victor's version, you know, so it's sometimes called his story as opposed to history, you know, but until we start teaching history that involves all Americans, we're not teaching American history. And until we come to that understanding, even, or maybe even especially those that have been so discounted, they don't want to go back. They don't want to go back to talk about times that are worse than they are now. But unfortunately, that means that they're not, you know, like I said, the myth of everything is equal gets perpetrated. When you understand, you know, when you understand history, when you understand what slavery tried to do and did accomplish in some ways, you understand why the population is where it is. And without that understanding, there must be something wrong with them. Why are they always the poor ones? Why are they always behind? Why are they always, you know, if you don't take into cognizance how our country developed and how some people were systematically excluded and pushed out and pushed down and cut off and destroyed, then you get to looking at today, nobody owns slaves anymore. Nobody's a slaveholder. What's the problem? But there's all of that is missed. So, I mean, I don't really have an answer to how to help people connect, except in the same way that I was connected, by finding my history and then recognizing, you know, now, you know, once I understood, I lost that sense of, you know, people being able to tell you that you didn't belong, you know, because people other you all the time. They still do it, frankly, whenever they can. Here I'm a legislator and I run into it in the campaign. That's a common, you know, way to try to make you look like you're from somewhere else. In my case, because I'm out here in Ashford or in the country, they'll talk about, well, she's concerned about city issues, even though since 1955 I've been grown up out here. But that's the kind of othering that I'm talking about. It's like, oh, she's something different for those other people. And you fight against that all your life. So it's hard to be even well-intentioned to fully understand that there is value there because it's never been shown to us. And so maybe when you begin to highlight individuals or trace someone and help someone understand what has happened and why it's happened, then all of us can move forward, you know, together with a new understanding. But I do understand why that's a problem. Mm-hmm. You surely can understand, I don't know what in each individual's history might be the most shameful thing that ever happened to them or ever, their parents were, rum runners or something. I don't know. It's not that shameful. People, some of those folks are millionaires. But if you go back to whatever it was, nobody wants to go back there, So I don't know if I have an answer beyond everybody being brought to the same place, and a recognition of what has been taken, what has been stolen, what has been lost. Will there be reconciliation someday? I don't know. But I can understand why some people think it's appropriate, because when you look at what has happened and where we are and where we would have been had that not happened, you see, the generational losses of an entire race of people.
I just want to share a great comment that is, underscores something that you're saying, Pat, that came through in the chat from Valerie. It's like striving for a history that encompasses all who lived here and who live here. Mm-hmm. And if I can just jump in for a minute to think about a couple of things that Portia's question gets me thinking about. I mean, one is this question of historiography, right? The history of history, and how the same documents have been looked at and interpreted in different ways over time. And I think in general, my sense is that many members of the public see changes in the way we tell history as primarily a political act, and rather than as just the history of history, what we call historiography, and thinking about how certainly, history is situated in its moment in time. The writing of history and the interpretation of documents has that kind of situatedness. And I think, I think that's a role that historical societies can play, is helping the public have a better understanding of what it is that historians do, and how interpretations of history of the same primary sources, like Dennis was talking to, go back to the primary sources, have changed over time. And then I think you raised, but your question really, your second question kind of raised this really important issue of motivation, right? For whom are we engaging in this work? And I think that's a really important one. And it seems to me to suggest something which I imagine you're already doing, which is, trying to get a better sense of, how you want to expand your audience, and getting input from the people whose pasts you may be narrating, and involving them in the conversation. Because it sounds like you thought, in telling the history of slavery, you encountered resistance that you weren't necessarily expecting. And I think that, presumably part of the work that many people here are engaged in doing is trying to widen the circle of people who are involved in the conversations at your sites, to broaden that audience as well. So
in some ways it comes back to what you define as an American. And if you're in this to better define America as it has always been, then that's an inclusive, that's a more inclusive way. If you're looking at it to, elevate Black history, that's one thing. If you're looking at it to elevate America, which has in it Black history, that's something else altogether. And perhaps, I guess what I was trying to say is, when people begin to recognize that it is American history, that it is all American history, and that we will never reach, our goals until we own it, until people internalize that. And I don't just mean, people of color or teachers or historians, I mean everybody, until they recognize that resistance as fragility, which is the other thing which people don't want to talk about, but it's really one and the same thing. It's like that. It's a sense of, well, if you're bringing other people's history in, then you're taking some of mine away. It's that you can't expand history to cover all people without it somehow discriminating against white people. That's what you're dealing with. That's the fragility, if you want to, for lack of a better word, that you're sometimes dealing with. People don't see it as important. People don't recognize it as real. So why are you putting this on me? That's the underlying problematic attitude that we have to deal with one step at a time.
Well, thank you. I mean, I feel like this is a conversation we could probably have for like another hour. And unfortunately, we're 10 minutes beyond our allotted time. So I want to thank everyone for being a part of this conversation, for taking the time to be here today, to all of our presenters for sharing their stories and more about the work that they've been doing. So a big round of applause for everyone. Thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure for us. I'm happy to stick around for a little longer, and I don't know if any of our presenters have a few moments to entertain any questions that people haven't had a chance to ask, but I wanted to kind of call this to a close for now. I'll stop the recording, and thank you once again for being here. I look forward very much to seeing you at a future League program. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.